John Brown's body lies a-mouldering in the grave, while weep the sons of bondage whom he ventured all to save. But though he sleeps, his life was lost while struggling for the slave. His soul is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory,
Welcome
glory,
to War of the Rebellion, Stories of the Civil War. I am your host, Leon, and this is a reading of the personal history, Reminiscences of the 19th Massachusetts Regiment, by Captain John G.B. Adams. Chapter 16. The Capture and Return to Columbia. About 4 in the afternoon, we sat up in the husks, ate the last of the cornbread the Negro had given us, then covered ourselves over to wait for darkness. While we were hidden from view, we did not entirely cover our haversack. In a short time we heard voices, and a man said, "There is a haversack. I am going to get it." As he walked over the husks, he stepped on me, but I did not squeal. As he picked up the haversack, he saw Frank's arm and cried, "The barn is full of damned Yankees." We heard the click as they cocked their pieces, and thinking it about time to stop further proceedings, we lifted up our heads. "Throw down your arms," was the next order. We explained that we had performed that sad duty several months before. After much talk, they let us come out. Our captors were Texas Rangers, the hardest-looking set of men I ever met, dressed more like cowboys than soldiers, armed with sabers, 2 revolvers each, carbines, besides a lariat hung to the saddle. There were but 3 of them, and we resolved to make an appeal for one more chance. In the most earnest manner possible, we told the story of our long service in the field, our starvation in prison, our long tramp for liberty, and our near approach to our lines, and begged them to let us go. I think we made an impression on them, but after conferring they said, "You are loyal to your side, and we must be to ours, but we will use you well while we have you in charge." The rest of the company came up while we were talking. They had 36 prisoners, captured from Sherman's army. These were known as Sherman's bummers. My experience with the Army of the Potomac had been such that I looked with little favor on the bummers. Had they been with their comrades, they would not have been captured. But they were, like a large part of that army, scattered over the country, not foraging for the army, but for themselves. And the loyal Negro was cleaned out the same as the Reb. It was demoralizing, and had the rebels been in force on this flank or rear, disasters instead of success would have overtaken that grand army before it reached to the sea. With the bummers, we were turned into the corn and slept in the husks that night. Bright and early the next morning, we were turned out and were soon on our way back to Augusta. The old Negro came to see us off. As his eyes fell on Frank and me, a look of sadness came over his face. Our guards were well mounted, and they made us hipper. We marched several miles without a halt, when we came to a brook, where all were given a chance to quench our thirst. As we had no cups, we lay down and drank. One by one, the boys got up and started on, I alone remaining. I was sure that the guards were gone, and was ready to run for the woods when, looking over my shoulder, I saw one with his revolver pointed at my head. "Thoughts you had got away, didn't you?" "Oh, no," I replied. "I was very thirsty, and it took me a long time to drink." "Well, I am looking after you." And he made me double quick until I caught up with the rest. We halted at night, in a grove near a large mansion. We were hungry and footsore, having eaten nothing that day, and having marched 30 miles. The lieutenant, commanding the guard, went to the house and demanded supper for 70 men. The old man said he had nothing, that Sherman's army had stripped him of all he had. "Never mind the story," said the guard. "Bring out the grub." After declaring over and over again that he had nothing, the officer said, "We will see," and sent a sergeant and some men into the house. The old man changed his tune a little, said he would try to find something, and after a short time brought out a bag of meal, some sweet potatoes, and a side of bacon. All shared alike, the prisoners receiving the same as the guard. The night was as cold as any December night in the north, and the guard drew on the old man for a good supply of wood. Unlike our army, they did not go after it, but ordered it brought to them. They built several large fires, and then posted guards for the night. We were in a small space, and there were only 7 men on posts. I believed there was a chance to make a break, if we could only make the men understand it. Frank and I formed our plans and began to work them. I had laid down by the side of 2 prisoners and got them interested. Then stood up, warmed myself, and was sauntering over to the 3rd when one of the guards cocked his piece and said, "Yank, you get up on that stump. I don't like to see you moving about so much." I tried to explain that I was so cold that I could not sleep and must move to keep warm, but he replied, "I think I shall feel better to see you on that stump." So I took the stump and held it until daylight. Another draft was made upon the old man for breakfast, and we continued the march. The citizens along the route were very bitter, and at times the guards had hard work to protect us. Women came out with revolvers, looking for the Yanks who had broken open their trunks. Although our guards were very kind to us, they did not take so kindly to Sherman's men. While in a ravine, they halted us and proposed to strip us. Frank and I protested. They said, "These men have robbed our people and ought to be punished." We told them they would get enough when they arrived at the prison, and that it was too cheap business for gentlemen, as they had proved themselves to be. This aroused their pride, and they let the boys march on. At Waynesboro, the citizens were determined to kill us. One old man struck a boy over the head with a hickory cane, breaking the cane in 2. It looked as though we should have a hard time, but the guards stood by us and declared that they would shoot the next one who struck us. The women were worse than the men, and could hardly keep from scratching our eyes out. All were going to die in the last ditch, live in the mountains, walk to Europe, or do anything except live in the same country with Yankees. We were called every name that was bad. One woman said the Yankees were so mean that when they went through the town, they stole a woman's false teeth. It was suggested that if she had kept her mouth shut, they would not have known she had false teeth. The guards laughed, and the woman jumped up and down, mad way through. She was about as angry with the guards as with us. We took cars here for Augusta. The Texans said Georgians were mighty mean people, and they reckoned we had better get to Augusta before we had trouble. We arrived at Augusta late in the afternoon. The boys expected us and were in line on each side of the street to welcome us. Old men called us Yankee Doodles. Boys called us Bluebellies. The women yelled all sorts of vile words. We marched up the main street into an old stockyard. An officer, dressed in the uniform of a captain of our army, stood at the gate. And the first words we heard were, "Halt, damn you, halt! Would you like to go to hell in a moment?" Our Texas guards left us here. They shook hands with Frank and me, wished us good luck, but reckoned we would have a right hard time with this fellow. The imp of darkness who commanded the place was a Tennessean named Moore. He was surrounded by a gang of cutthroats, mostly deserters from our army, who, having jumped all the bounties possible, had joined his gang. Nearly all were dressed in uniforms of blue. We were turned into a mule pen, and while resting there, a boy about 17 years old, dressed in rebel gray, came to me and said, "They are going to search you. If you have anything you want to save, give it to me." "But you are a rebel," I said, "and I can't trust you." He answered that he was not, only galvanized, had taken the oath, that he had been a prisoner at Andersonville and had not courage to hold out, so he had gone over to the other side, but assured me that if I would trust him, he would be true. While I hated the sight of him for his treason, he was better than the rest. All I had was my diary. It was very imperfect and of no real value, but in it I had noted the places where we had stopped while out, and I felt if Moore got it, the Negroes who had assisted us would suffer, so I gave it to him. Soon after Moore came in, he swore at us collectively, by detachments and individually. Looking at me, he said, "I swear you look like the breaking up of a hard winter." He drew us into line and the picking began. Frank had a corps badge that he had made while at Charleston. It was cut out of bone, and was the work of days, but it had to go. As the Tennessean came to me, he said, "That cuss isn't worth picking," and passed me by. From the men they took everything, pictures of friends and home, and when it was a picture of a lady, coarse remarks would be made. After all the articles had been taken from their pockets, the order was given to take off pants, blouses, and shoes, and when we were turned back into the pen, they were nearly naked. The pen was very filthy. The mules had recently vacated, and it had not been cleaned. Moore said, "Make yourselves as miserable as possible, and I hope to God not one of you will be alive in the morning." Gangs of the rough came in and tried to trade. One of the boys came to me saying, "I have a watch," and they did not find. One of these men says he will give 4 blankets for a watch, and I think I had better let him have it, or we shall freeze to death here. I assured him that he would lose his watch and get no blankets, but he was so cold he could not resist the temptation, and gave the fellow the watch. When he came in again, he asked for the blankets. The wretch knocked him down and kicked him. That was all he received for the watch. My galvanized friend turned up again, and said they were coming after my jacket, that they wanted the buttons. I took it off and laid it under another man. Soon, they came in and asked for the officer with the jacket. A friend outside wanted to talk with him. They shook me and asked where he was. I replied, "He lay down over the other side." They carried a pitch pine, torches, and looked at every man, but failed to find the jacket. We managed to live through the night, and in the morning my boy returned the diary. And Frank, 2 other officers who had been recaptured, and myself were taken out to be sent to Columbia. As we passed out, I heard one of the gang say, "There is the cuss with the jacket." But he did not take it, and we marched to the depot. The rebels must have entertained an idea that Yankees could live without food, for they issued no rations to us either at night or in the morning, and we were hungry enough to eat a raw dog. Our train was one of those southern tri-weeklies, which went from Augusta to Columbia one week and tried to get back the next. Stopped at every crossroad. At one place, an old Negro woman was selling sweet potato pies. I had a Byam's match paper, and I bought one with it. She asked, "Is it good, boss?" I replied that it was worth $5 in Confederate, and she was satisfied. I think she got the best of it, for the thing she sold me for a pie was a worse imitation of that article than the match paper was of Confederate money. At another place, I bought a 2-quart pail, 2/3 full of ham fat, paying for it with one of the $5 bills Packard gave us. We spent the entire day on the road, arriving at Columbia at 7 o'clock in the evening, and were put in jail. We were not confined in a cell, but in a small room with a fireplace. We found a fire burning on the hearth and went to work. As we had no opportunity to examine our clothes since we escaped, their condition can be imagined. We took bricks out of the hearth and spent an hour reducing the inhabitants. It sounded like the discharge of musketry, and the list of killed was larger than in any battle of the war. In the morning, we were ordered out and marched through the city. We learned that Camp Sorghum had been broken up, and our officers moved to the lunatic asylum. The gate of the new prison swung open. The crowd gathered expecting to see fresh fish, but instead saw 4 ragged, dirty old tramps. We were received with a grand hurrah, and they gathered around to hear our story. We had been out just 4 weeks and had traveled more than 300 miles. While we were much disappointed, we were not discouraged. Our trip had done us good. We had gained in flesh, had thrown off the stagnation of prison life, and were ready to try again. We found many changes inside. Major Dunn and Captain Hume had received special exchange. Others had escaped, and the squads were broken. We were assigned to Squad 15, composed of men who had escaped, and we were a fine collection of innocents. Before we escaped from Camp Sorghum, an order had been issued by the rebel commander that if any more escaped, they would put us in a pen, and the removal to asylum prison was the result. There were about 2 acres enclosed. On 3 sides were brick walks. On the 4th, a high board fence, which separated us from the insane. Sentry boxes were built around the place, and 2 pieces of artillery were pointed at us through the fence. Inside was a wooden building used for a hospital. The frames of about 30 small buildings were up, and 11 were covered. The work had been done by our officers, and the rebels promised to send in lumber to cover the rest. But it never came. The 11 would accommodate about 300, the rest being quartered in a few old tents. Our squad had neither buildings nor tents, and we huddled together on the bare ground. It was so cold that we walked most of the night to keep from freezing. I received 8 letters upon my return. They had been written at various times, but all came in one mail. My friends had heard from me but once, and that was a letter written and sent out by an officer who was exchanged at Charleston. I had written several letters, but suppose they were never sent north. Frank was taken sick and sent to the hospital. I visited him every day. The only advantage he received from being in the hospital were a roof to shelter him and his mush made thinner, called gruel. He only remained a week, as he chose to be with us. Christmas Day came, and we were anxious to celebrate in some way. I had held on to $10 that Packard gave me, as I feared we should require it for salt, but concluded to have a nice dinner. So I bought a squash, and we feasted on boiled squash and salt. Soon after January 1st, a chance was opened to get a little money. A man named Potter, claiming to belong to Rhode Island and to be a Union man, made arrangements with the rebel officers to let us have 6 for 1 in gold or 2 for 1 in greenbacks. At that time outside the walls, gold was 50 for 1 Confederate and greenbacks 25. We gave this noble-hearted man bills of exchange on friends at home, and were obliged to endorse them as follows. This money was loaned me while a prisoner of war, and I desire it paid. The arrangements were made through a rebel officer and done on the sly. We did not get the money, but an order on the rebel settlers, who put up a tent inside and did a thriving business. The bills of exchange were sent north. How, we never knew, and in nearly every instance paid by our friends, who believed they were repaying a friend for kindness to us. We were obliged to obtain the money to keep from starving, and our necessities were such that we would have given twice the amount charged, but it was a grand swindle nevertheless, and persons both north and south were engaged in it. I managed to get into the ring and gave a draft of $50, receiving $300 in Confederate money. One not acquainted with the prices and value of the money would think that I was quite well off, but in 2 weeks it was all gone, and yet we were as prudent as possible. We first purchased some coarse cloth, paying $15 per yard, then bought some cotton and made a quilt. We paid at the rate of $1.50 per pound for the thread to make it with. Pork was $7 per pound, tea $120 per pound, shoes $100 per pair, lead pencils $3 each, fool's cap paper $225 per ream, envelopes 25 cents each, and other things in the same proportion. But the money put new life into the prisoners, and many a man came home who would have died without it. I was always blessed with friends, and am indebted to many old comrades for favors. Frank and I slept, or tried to, on the ground, without shelter for 2 weeks. One day, Captain Louis R. Fortescue of the Signal Corps said, "Jack, I believe we can make room for you and Frank in our shebang." He was with a party of officers of the 18th Pennsylvania Cavalry, and they said by packing snugly we could come in. It was snug quarters, but neither they nor we growled. My ham fat was a fortune. Our new mess owned a piece of iron, I think it was the side of an old stove, and it was used to cook cornmeal cakes on. If anyone outside the mess wanted to cook on it, they paid 1 cook in 10 for the privilege. But it was a hard job unless it was well greased, as the cakes would stick. It was soon known that I had the fat, because when we cooked we greased the griddle with a rag soaked in ham fat. Outsiders would say, "Jack, lend me your grease," but I had an eye to business and would ask, "How many cakes will you give me?" We fixed the tariff at 1 cake in 10, so that when we had plenty of business for the griddle and greaser our mess fared well. We were very discontented, and were bound to escape the first possible chance. Many tunnels were planned, and one nearly completed when the rebels came in and, driving the prisoners out of the tent where the shaft was sunk, with little trouble discovered it. We were confident we had been betrayed, and suspicion fell on a lieutenant who was quite intimate with the rebel officers. A committee was appointed to investigate. Before night a notice was posted on the bulletin board that General Winder has ordered that unless tunneling is stopped, all buildings, tents, lumber, and shelter of any kind will be removed from the yard, and that he will use force for force if any attempt is made to punish prisoners who report tunneling to these headquarters. Signed by Major Griswold, commanding prison. I will not give the name of the lieutenant because I may do him injustice. But while our committee could not obtain information enough to try him, all believed he was the man, and we did not see him after we left Columbia. February 8th was a day of Thanksgiving. News was received that General Winder was dead. He was commander of all the prisoners, and largely responsible for our treatment. Before the war he was a citizen of Baltimore, and was selected for the position he held by Jefferson Davis, because no suffering could touch his heart. The information was given us in this way. The prison was calm and still. When the voice of Lieutenant David Garbutt was heard, "Hell has received reinforcements. Winder is dead." A cheer went up from every man in the prison. If the guards knew the cause of our joy, they made no effort to stop it. February 13th, a meeting was held to organize the National Legion. It was proposed to have it take the form that was afterwards adopted by the Grand Army of the Republic, and I have always believed that the men who organized the Grand Army were some of them members of our prison association, for when I joined the Order in 1867, the grip was the same as our old Council of 10. Tunneling began in earnest, and several tunnels were well underway. The plan of operation was to sink a shaft from 4 to 5 feet deep, then dig from that. The digging was done with a knife, spoon, or half of a canteen. Our squad began one from house number 1. We were more fortunate than some, for we had secured a shovel, cut it down with a railroad spike, and sawed off the handle. With this, we could lie on our bellies and work with both hands. The digger had a bag, usually made out of an old coat sleeve, and, when he had filled it, he pulled a string and it was withdrawn by the comrades at the opening. They would empty it into their coat sleeves, and with their coats thrown over their shoulders would walk about the prison, dropping the dirt wherever they could. Usually when digging a tunnel, we made holes in various places during the day so that the new dirt would not attract attention. The man inside had to be relieved often, as the air was so bad one could not remain over 15 minutes. We were obliged to dig 56 feet before we were outside of the wall. As work could only be done at night, our progress was very slow. 50 feet had been excavated, and began to look as though we should be free again. But on February 14th, the order came to move, and half the officers were taken out, marched to the depot, fooled around nearly all night in a drenching rain, then marched back to prison again, as they had no cars to take us out of the city. We renewed our work in the tunnel, continuing all night and the next day, but before we could get beyond the wall, they moved us. We covered up 3 of the officers in the dirt at the mouth of the tunnel, but when the rebels were making their last round through the prison to see if all were out, they were discovered. Chapter 17. The Exchange and Return North is where we will pick up next week. Thank you, everyone, for listening to this week's episode. Now, some of you may have caught last week, but I didn't end the series with the next chapter introduction, and I did that so you'd have a little bit of hope that he might actually escape. I was so sad when he got caught. All right, let's move on to these notes. We have a lot to talk about. Getting caught by leaving a haversack uncovered, something that in this point in time is universally a sign for booty. During this time period, haversacks were gold if you could get them. And to have one lying around, you're just like, oh yeah, there's gold in there. I'm going to go pick it up. It's just, it hurts. It hurts my soul. All right. I also want to draw special attention to the words that he chose here, that when the rebel walks over him, he says, I did not squeal. Such a cool sentence that this man got to write in his memoir. All right. Now, he says he ran into Texas Rangers. I looked it up to see if it was true or not. Now, I looked up what group of Texas Rangers were operating in this area, and you guys aren't going to believe this. Not even one little bit. So here we go. Specifically operating outside of Sherman's army at this time period is a group of mounted cavalry. If you already know, I will pause for a moment to let you say it out loud. But for the rest of us, it's the 8th Texas Cavalry, or Terry's Texas Rangers, as they became known. They were shock troops of the highest order for the Confederate Army in the West. They fought in 275 engagements across 7 states. As part of the Army of the Tennessee, they fought at Shiloh, Murfreesboro, Chickamauga, and then both the Knoxville and Atlanta campaigns, and the Carolina campaign. Now, why do I believe he meant them in particular? Let me gather you some crazy ideas, and paint you a story. First off, to join the Texas 8th Cavalry, you need to furnish yourself a carbine, or a shotgun, a Colt revolver, a Bowie knife, a saddle, bridle, and a blanket. So to even join the unit, you have to be heavily armed. Makes sense with the weapons he saw. Now, during this time period, a smaller group of Cav was formed from the 8th, called Shannon's Scouts. Captain Alexander May Shannon was ordered to take 30 men and harass Sherman's army, gather intelligence, and remove any bummers they find. They did more than that. They just straight up killed Union soldiers pretty much everywhere they went. They did, it seemed, take prisoners from time to time, but I think one example that one of the scouts gave is best. They found 12 Yankees and shot 6, and kept 6. Or if they found Yankees in 1s and 2s and 3s, they didn't take prisoners. They were ruthless and cold-hearted at that. One scout remembers in a letter to his parents, quote, "I have enjoyed myself for this trip, but think sometimes I am getting hard-hearted. But I notice the tears of a lady always bring tears to my eyes, and the smoke and flames of a dwelling prevents the prayers of the Yankees for their lives, even when on their knees, being heard, and steadies my nerves to kill them all if possible. I will get more of the blue jackets yet, as I have a brace of pistols that never snap, and a horse that is as true as steel and never flinches. Enoch D. John." Unquote. In the same letter to his parents, he talks about the dozens of Yankees they murder, who surrendered, and slaves they recaptured and sent back into slavery, which explains why they looked like the hardest men he had ever seen. They were some of the most dangerous. But also, as escapees, they got lucky. They weren't in Sherman's army. Now, the third and final reason that I think this unit and our writer came into contact. They were reported on to at times have captured Union soldiers in groups from 100 on down to 30 at a time, with just a handful of Confederates guarding them. So the Rangers operated until the end of the war, and then went home when it was all over. It's just a little interesting tidbit in this era of madness. Now, could have our author been mistaken? Yes. But this makes a great story, doesn't it? I'll leave some links on the website. You can come check out the sources I read from. They are quite interesting. I'm not sure if they're true. I was not able to link them all to first-hand accounts, but they cited first-hand accounts. So I'm going to leave you with that. And I imagine 2 guys who are escaped were probably looked on a little bit different than those who were the bummers at this time. So, especially when they're hunting them down. So after he's recaptured, I enjoy his constant attempts at trying to escape, which are just great. Staying back at the brook and waiting for everyone to leave is just genius. Then trying a night attempt, right? Being told, no, I don't like what you're doing. Sit on a stump and don't move. I just love his spirit. This is great. Later on, when the angry citizens are going after the soldiers, oh man. Convincing the guards not to strip the Union soldiers either, appealing to their honor, is just smooth criminal stuff. This guy's been in the system. He's been around. He knows how it works. I absolutely love that. So, in the second round of captivity, he's like this grizzled old veteran when it comes to the routine, right? He called a guy... He called a soldier who was leading a gang, the Imp of Darkness. A man who was leading a gang of cutthroats. Which is, sometimes I have to remember that this isn't a story about being in the army and not the Odyssey, with how he writes this. It's just so good. Also, I want to make a note, a mention. If you keep a diary, and you fill it with the names and locations of everyone who has helped you, get rid of it. Throw it away. Burn it. Don't write it down. Oh my goodness. All right. I mean, I'm glad he did, and it worked out, because we got the names and locations of everywhere he was, and the rebels didn't find out, but for your own reference, do not keep the names and locations of the people who have helped you when you're on the run. Can't believe I have to say that, but these are the times we're in. But the fact that he kept his diary and that he was able to successfully smuggle it into the prison via a turncoat double agent is not something I had on my what did I expect to read in a Civil War book today. But I feel like sometimes just showing how crazy the events are when you put them that way, rather than just how the author describes it, lets us know how crazy everything actually is that's going on. So he ends up in a mule pen with a bunch of other guys and the ruffians. They take that dude's watch and kick him. Then the turncoat comes back and tells him they're coming for his jacket. So he hides it underneath someone else. And then the next day when he leaves, he takes his coat with him. That's hardcore. And very funny. However, when he reaches the officers' prison at the asylum, which still exists today, so if you're in the area, you guys can go take a look at it. He's put in with all the other escapees, which is just, throwing all the degenerates together. I'm sure they won't do anything. And then when he gets recaptured, what does he get? He gets rewarded. He gets a giant mail haul from all of his friends and family. I love that as part of his story. And I also love how he leverages his ham fat empire, where he collected a tax on food, is genius. It hurts me that he had to resort to that in the first place. And he was also betrayed again. And think about that betrayal of someone turning in their tunnel. He knew the name of the person who betrayed them. And he could tell the whole world right now in this book, but you can't prove it. But you know they're a traitor. Just having to carry that around with you your whole life must have been something. What if that person goes on to become someone famous? What if that person went on to become famous and we know them? They're so famous. Man, just don't know. Juicy stuff, man. This is all of the dirty little secrets that I want to know. And the Grand Army of the Potomac, or the Grand Army of the Republic, hid all of this information. They kind of brushed it under. They wanted everybody to look back fondly over their time in the army, but it's not what happened. And some dudes bought their way in, and some dudes covered things up, but put my finger down. This is what I want to know, okay? So, I know that at this time period, like, the whole countryside is awash in spies, civilian spies, and everything else. So it's just, I get it. However, the best part and description is how they dug their tunnels. 5 or 6 feet down, 30 to 40 feet across. Especially with the way that, how they describe digging the tunnels. And can you imagine your job as hole digger, but not for digging the real hole, you're digging the fake holes so someone can come by and drop dirt in it from their sleeve. That's a really cool escape job. I also enjoyed it when General Winder died and everyone started celebrating. Hell has received reinforcements. Winder is dead. Man, what a good sentence. What a good time. I find every bit of his memoir here just a little bit funnier. Every page we get into. Now, he also suspects that some of the founding members of the Grand Army of the Potomac were also in the Council of 10. Now, that's a conspiracy theory. And a cool one I can get behind. Sure, why not? Now, I have looked online extensively, but I have not talked to sons of Union veterans who are the inheritors of the Grand Army of the Republic. So I haven't asked them if they still have a secret grip or not, or if that's been passed down or whatever. But maybe we should give them a call and find out. Alrighty, with that, it is the end of our episode. I wanted this out before Thanksgiving. I did not get it done, but I was hosting. It was crazy. It was nuts. Anyway, I've been super busy, but everyone, I should come clean. I am going back to school through the VA. This last quarter was my first quarter back, which is why the podcast wasn't coming out as regular. I really wanted to make sure that my grades were good. And if I had the choice between having to sit down and record and edit or work on oceanography homework, I'm sorry, my friends, the oceanography homework has to come first. So, worked really hard and pulled it off. Pretty sure I'm still waiting on some of my finals, but pretty sure I'm walking out of here with straight A's. This entire month of December, I have off, so I'm going to be doing lots of creating. Look forward to that, I suppose. I want to get some things out before Christmas. It's kind of like a little surprise, but anyway. My friends, thank you for listening. I will catch you in the next episode. The next episode is going to be next week. I'm not going to tell you about what's on the docket in the secret lineup, all right? Of surprises. So have a great one. Thanks for listening. I will see you guys in the next episode. And happy holidays.
Old John
Bye.
Brown's body lies a-mouldering in the grave, while weep the sons of bondage whom he ventured all to save. But though he sleeps, his life was lost while struggling for the slave. His soul is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. For his soul is marching on. John Brown was a hero, undaunted, true and brave, and Kansas knew his valor when he fought her rights to save. And now, though the grass grows green above his grave, his soul is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Hallelujah, for his soul is marching on. He captured Harper's Ferry with his 19 men so few, and frightened old Virginia till she trembled through and through. They hung him for a traitor, themselves a traitorous crew, but his soul is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. For his soul is marching on. John Brown was John the Baptist, of the Christ we are to see. Christ who of the bondman shall the liberator be. And soon throughout the sunny south the slaves shall all be free, for his soul is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. For his soul is marching on. The conflict that he heralded, he looked from heaven to view on the army of the Union with its flag red, white, and blue. And heaven shall sing with anthems o'er the deed they mean to do, for his soul is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. For his soul is marching on. Ye soldiers of freedom, then strike while strike ye may, the death blow of oppression in a better time and way. The dawn of old John Brown has brightened into day, and his soul is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. For his soul is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. For his soul is marching on. For his soul